Hi there, I'm Marie Camenares. Welcome to my art studio. Today I'd like to do a watercolor landscape with you. I'm going to show you this step by step and I'll tell you everything you need to execute this beautiful painting. This is the photograph that we'll be using as a reference for our watercolor painting. Okay, I did a rough watercolor sketch of this and I'll show you that in a minute. You're going to need a few different brushes, a round brush, a number 18, a medium-sized brush like a number 12, and a small round brush like a number 2 or number 1 for little fine details. Here are my brushes. The number 18 is right here, and the number 12 and the number 2 brush right here. You can use different kinds of watercolor paints. This is a small little travel kit and it has these little pancakes of watercolor paint and you just wet them and you could make them as liquidy as you like, or you can also use watercolor paints that come in tubes and I'll show you that. Here are the watercolor tubes. There's different companies that you can get. They're all pretty professional paints here. There's a Winsor Newton and Grumbacher and Coltman. And some of the colors that I'll be using is ultramarine blue. I'll be using a sap green, and I'll be using burnt sienna and a little bit of a darker green like a hunter green. I'll be using a little bit of burnt umber and even a little purple. But you can use any color you want, and you can use any brush that you want that you feel comfortable with. Here's my little sample sketch that I did before of the watercolor, and it basically shows the sky and the two banks of trees and a little lake with reflection in the lake. And I used 300 cold pressed paper. You can buy any paper that you like. This is what I had used. You can get this at any of the craft stores. But we should get started with painting now. So let's get to it. Okay, the first thing I did was just very gently with a pencil, just black out the areas here, just rough shapes that we see in the photograph. So I've got this one here for this part, then I've got a little bit going on over here for this part in here, and then this part here coming down represents this area here in the photograph. So with my large brush, I'm going to just take it, swirl it into the water, and I'm just going to wet this whole piece of paper down. Just apply a nice thin film of water throughout the whole canvas. It will have a nice little sheen to it and we'll get it all covered. There we go. I'm actually going to cover this whole piece of paper with some blue. I took some of the blue ultramarine blue paint and put it here in one of these little plastic containers. I'm making a consistency of liquidness about skim milk consistency. Take my brush and put a lot of paint on it. That's called loading up the brush. And then I'm going to start. Don't worry about it if it drips. I'm going to have it go in different areas on the paper. I'm going to add a little bit more water so it travels a little better down the page. And just help it along. I'm not worried about what it looks like at this point. I just want to get a nice coat of blue on the paper. putting some areas here even a little darker because our sky is a little darker in some areas. And we're going to have our trees coming through this, so not to worry. We're going to have a lot of reflection in the water, so not to worry of how it might appear to look to you at this point. It's exactly what we want it to be. And I'm going to show you a trick of how you can make some really nice looking clouds. Let's actually take my brush, rinsing it off. I'm actually going to put a little purple into this sky, just a little purple down in here. Look how nice those colors blend. Just let the paper do its own thing. And I'm leaving an area a little lighter right here to reflect the same area here in the photograph. Now, as promised, I'm going to show you how you can make a simple cloud. Just take a piece of paper towel and scrunch it up and just blot it ever so gently on the paper. And you've got yourself some nice clouds. The next thing we're going to do, and still using my large number 18 round watercolor brush, I'm going to put in some of the reflection in the water. And this is unusual because I'm putting this in even before I'm putting in the trees. So I'm just going to take a little bit of green. Now I have a mixture of Hooker's green here, and I'm going to mix that with a little bit of sap green and make it a nice liquidy consistency. And I'm just going to wet my brush, wet the paint, and I'm going to just put it right in here. And going to do the same thing on the other side. Put a little bit right in here. I'm also going to come down with my brush vertically and horizontally. I'll be repeating that throughout the painting. And I really like the way all these colors seem to blend themselves together with the blue and the different greens and even that little bit of purple that we had put in the water. See how fine that looks even now? Really looks great. Alrighty, now let's get some trees into the picture. I'm going to take still my very large brush and the sap green color, and I'm going to tap in some foliage up in here. I'm going to tap in some foliage down in here. And I'm just going to spread it around. I'm going to do the same thing, and also make sure that you don't cover up all the blue because we want that to show through. I'm also going to take my brush and dry it a little bit on the paper towel and then come back in and just lighten it up and scatter it about. We want a very dry brush so we really get the feel of foliage in there. And then we want to take that brush and we want to drag it down a little bit for reflection. With the same brush, and it's still pretty dry, we're just going to tap a little bit in over here on the other side. We're going to put in a little bit of foliage right in here. And then we're going to go into a darker color green. Maybe like a hunter's green or even darker. And we want to get some of the darkness of these trees here. So the brush is almost dry. There we go, just keep tapping away. Don't cover all your blue. We're tapping in our treetops. And then we'll be putting in the trunks. And down in here, this is pretty dark too. So let's just, still with the same brush, and it's almost dry, let's just put in a little bit of treetops in here and coming along. And there we have it. Just an indication of the trees. It doesn't have to be anything too specific right now. We're gonna layer this up and it will just come to life as we go along. So I went ahead and I tapped a little bit more darker green color in here and there. And now what I'm going to do is take my medium size number 12 watercolor round brush, and I'm going to put in a little indication of land. So I'm going to take the burnt sienna and I'm going to mix it with a little water and just get it very pale, because I don't want this to go on too dark. I can always add it darker later. And I'm just going to just put an indication here of land. Just very gently. And on the other side too. Just like that, just a little bit. Now in my photograph, I have some trees that are a little bit turning color, so I'm going to take my medium brush and the burnt sienna, and I'm just going to tap it in up in here for a little bit of foliage on the trees here. And I'm going to tap in a little bit down here. A little bit of foliage or bushes or something going on in there. And the next thing I'm going to do after this is I'm going to put in some tree trunks. So we'll just go ahead and put a little bit more tapping here with the foliage, with a little bit of burnt sienna on my brush, and I'm trying to keep the brush fairly dry. Just want it to get little just taps in there, little wisps of foliage in there. And you can do a little bit stronger here and there. But I think something like that looks really good. Okay, we're gonna come back in. We're gonna put in some tree trunks. I'm using my very skinny brush, my number 1 here watercolor brush, and I'm going into the burnt umber, and I'm getting this on the brush fairly thick, not adding too much water to it because I do want it to show up pretty dark. And let's just come in here with 1 tree trunk. Let's make this fairly thick on the bottom. Have it come out on the bottom a little bit. And then I'm going to just put in a couple more tree trunks. 1 over here, 1 in here. And on the other side, I want to just make an indication that there's some trees coming out over here as well. You could take the brush and start to put in some branches from the trees from that too. And I'm just using the burnt umber for this right now. There we go. Doesn't have to be fancy, just a few little lines to indicate that there are some branches coming from these trees. We're going to go over this again with some more foliage, a little bit darker this time. There we go. I'm back to using my very large brush again, and I'm going into the Hunter Green. I want to get a good amount of paint on the brush, but not too watery. I'm going to take the brush bristles and I'm just going to push it into the paper so I can get some real strong foliage coming out from that. I'll just hold my paper down so you can see what I'm doing. And some of the time I'm going to be covering the tree trunks with some foliage there. And I'm just pushing in. Do the same on this side. And I also want to, at this point, put a little bit of the bushes here on the ground. A little bit over here. And a slight bit down here. There we go. Now it's time to grab your skinny little brush again, and we're going to define our land just a little bit more. I'm going to use the burnt sienna for that, and I'm just going to come in here, make a little line for the land that's in here, and I'm going to bring that right down along the shoreline. Have it come right underneath the land to give a shadow and to actually just bring that up into the ground. So that's going to be the basis of our ground here. And I'm going to do the same thing on this side here. Just put in a little bit of land. Push it out a little bit. You can make it any shape you want. I'm going to take my large brush, it's a dry brush basically, and I'm just going to tap into that just to smooth it out. Take some of my green, put some of the green into that, so I have some little plant material and little bushes coming out from that. This is a lighter green that I'm using for this now. And I wanted to show you how to make the sun hit against here to make this where our light source is. I'm taking my large brush again, and this time I'm putting it into my light, I have a light yellow that I'm using, and I'm just putting a little onto the brush, and I'm going to just tap it in to show a little bit of highlight, how the sun is just reflecting on these trees and reflecting in this area of the foliage. And this will be where my light source is. You can see the difference of how this looks shadier. We can just stick a little bit in between because maybe there's a little bit of light that comes through the spaces of the trees. But this is the brightest part. Put a little bit of light up in here too. I'm taking the large brush with a little bit of the ultramarine blue, And I'm just putting in a little bit of shadow work right in here to give this a little bit of depth. And I'm only just picking out a few spots to do this. Not many at all. Just want to show that there's some dimension here. Okay, I think we've got enough of that color in there. Now we're going to work a little bit more on the reflection. I'm taking my very skinny brush again, and I want to just make a little indication of a reflection of this tree in the water. So I'm going to just bring this down a little bit and a little bit here. And same thing with these trees right here. Maybe just put a little bit of reflection back in here from these darker areas. Then with my large brush, I'm really drying it so it doesn't have too much moisture on it. I'm going to just come across very gently to break up that line. I'm going to put a little bit more reflection from these bushes into the water with the sap green, and I'm going to do this with my large brush. There's very little water, very little paint on the brush, just bringing it down in some long vertical strokes. I'm actually going to take a little bit of yellow and put that on like a cadmium yellow. Just lighten it up. See that? Bring that down into the water. Maybe hit this bush with a little bit of yellow here too. And I'm going to do the same thing on this side going across. Didn't put any more paint on my brush. I'm just going to come across here too, just to break it up a little bit. Now I'm going to take my little brush again, my number 1, and I have a little purple I want to use here. I'm just going to define again the land just a little bit more. So I'm just going to put a little touch of purple in here. And just a little more in here. And maybe even a little bit down in here. Just gives it a little bit of interest. We can put a little even in here, just to show that these trees back here are darker. We're not seeing them as well. These in here really makes it have some really very interesting color combinations. And I can actually take a very little bit, I can bring it out into the water, just a tiny bit in here for a nice reflection. I can take a little bit and bring it out into the water like right in here. And a little bit over here. And a little bit more going a little darker as we go along. Now I'm going to take my larger brush and just work that in. Put a little bit of purple on this side, and I've worked it in. And just a little bit more on this side right here. And just work it down a little bit. The very last thing I'm going to do is just add a touch more blue of the ultramarine blue, and just put a little bit darker blue in here to match this and to match the reflection of the sky. There's a little bit of blue in here. Just let it work itself in. And just a little bit of blue in here. And I think we've got a completed painting. I hope that you have enjoyed doing this watercolor painting with me. I have had so much fun doing this with you, and I hope that you'll join me again for another project. This is Marie Camenares saying bye for now. Stay healthy and stay safe.